The wind didn't just blow in the high peaks of the Bitterroot Range, and at number years old, William Wynne was a man built of granite and old scars. Standing tall with a muscular build and broad shoulders, he moved through the waist-deep snow with the calculated precision of the Navy SEAL he once was. His square-jawed face was set against the biting frost, his deep moss-green eyes scanning the horizon through a veil of falling white. His military buzz cut, now a rugged salt and pepper, was dusted with ice. He wasn't looking for trouble, he was looking for peace. But in the wilderness, peace is a fragile thing. Suddenly, something caught his eye. 3 dark shapes huddled beneath a shelf of jagged rock. At first he thought they were boulders, but as he drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. They were dogs. 3 German shepherds, their fur matted with ice, curled together in a desperate attempt to preserve a warmth that had long since vanished. They were motionless, like statues carved from the winter itself. Most men would have seen a tragedy and walked away, but William Wynne wasn't most men. He knelt, his powerful sun-kissed hands reaching out to the lead dog, a black and tan mix with erect, pointed ears. He felt no breath, no movement, just the terrifying chill of death. But then a faint, rhythmic pulse flickered against his palm. They were still fighting, and if they were fighting, so was he. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. William knew that every second was a thief. He couldn't carry all 3 at once, but his SEAL training kicked in adapt and overcome. He fashioned a makeshift sled from his heavy canvas tarp and paracord, gently lifting the Barmer-kilogram lead dog, Smokey, onto the fabric. Smokey, a striking cross between a German shepherd and a Labrador, looked up with intelligent dark brown eyes that seemed to plead for a miracle. William's deep forehead wrinkles creased in concentration as he secured the other 2 beside him. With the strength of a man half his age, he gripped the rope and began the grueling trek back to his cabin. His boots crunched through the ice, his moss-green eyes fixed on the smoke rising from his chimney in the distance. "Hold on," he grunted, his voice a low rasp. "You didn't survive the storm just to give up now." His salt-and-pepper beard was caked in frost, but his resolve was fire. He reached the cabin, the heavy wooden door swinging open to a world of warmth and cedar wood. He began the delicate process of thawing them, using lukewarm blankets and the steady heat of the hearth. Before we find out if these brave dogs make it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support helps us tell more incredible stories of heroism and survival. The cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the fireplace and the heavy breathing of a man who refused to quit. William sat on the floor, his back against the stone hearth, watching the 3 dogs. The 2 purebred German shepherds were starting to stir, but it was Smokey who claimed his attention. Even in her weakened state, the dog's posture was remarkably upright, a testament to a lineage of discipline. As the ice melted from her fur, William noticed something odd. These weren't just stray dogs. Their coats were well groomed beneath the grime, and their muscles were lean and defined, trained for endurance, not just play. Smokey's eyes fluttered open. She didn't growl or bark. Instead, she looked at William with a piercing intelligence that chilled him more than the wind had. She sat up slowly, her long, strong muzzle sniffing the air. She looked at her 2 companions, then back at William, letting out a soft, rhythmic whine that sounded almost like a report. William's moss-green eyes narrowed. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of K9 units in the desert, in the eyes of partners who had seen the worst of the world. He reached out, stroking Smoke's black and tan head. That's when he felt it, a small hard lump beneath the fur of her neck. It wasn't a tumor, it was a high-frequency microtransmitter, the kind used by elite tactical units. William moved his hand carefully, his fingers tracing the edges of the device hidden in Smokey's thick fur. His square jaw tightened. This wasn't a standard pet microchip, this was military-grade hardware, encrypted and ruggedized. He looked at the other 2 dogs. They had similar markings and the same tactical posture. A realization washed over him, settling in his gut like lead. These dogs hadn't just been lost in a storm, they were on a mission, and whoever they belonged to was likely looking for them or running from something they had found. William walked to his workbench, his muscular frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. He pulled out an old frequency scanner, a relic from his days in the service. As he tuned the dial, the machine let out a sharp, rhythmic chirp. The dogs instantly snapped to attention, their ears pricked, their bodies tense and ready. Smokey stood at the front, her dark brown eyes locked on the window. She wasn't looking at the snow, she was guarding the door. William realized that by saving these dogs, he had inadvertently brought a secret into his home, a secret that breathed, watched, and waited. The quiet life he had built in the mountains was about to vanish, replaced by the shadows of a past he thought he had left behind. The following morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a world of blinding white and deadly silence. William stood on his porch, Smokey standing perfectly still at his side. The dog's intelligent eyes were fixed on the valley below, where a cluster of abandoned industrial warehouses sat near the frozen river. William adjusted his jacket, his broad shoulders tense. He noticed a faint trail of disturbed snow leading away from the warehouses, not the tracks of an animal, but the heavy, rhythmic tread of tactical boots. Using a pair of high-powered binoculars, William scanned the perimeter of the distant buildings. He didn't see any movement at first, but his SEAL instincts screamed a warning. He saw a flash of black, a thermal blanket being tucked away. There were men down there, professional men. They were moving crates with precision, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the tree line. There were no uniforms, no insignias, just the cold efficiency of mercenaries. Smokey let out a low vibration like huff, her muzzle pointing directly at the largest warehouse. She knew what was inside. William looked down at her, a silent understanding passing between the veteran and the dog. They weren't just going to sit here and wait. They were going to find out what those men were hiding before the peace of this town was shattered forever. William Wynne didn't believe in coincidences. In his 20 years as a SEAL, coincidences were just details you hadn't connected yet. He spent the morning preparing, his large, powerful hands moving with muscle memory as he checked his gear. He wasn't carrying a rifle, he was carrying decades of experience. He looked at Mott for his reflection in the frosted window. The deep crow's feet around his moss-green eyes were more pronounced today, a map of every mission he had survived. His salt and pepper boxed beard was trimmed and his broad shoulders felt the weight of the task ahead. He wasn't just a retired veteran anymore, he was a protector. Smokey stood by the door, her upright posture as rigid as a soldier at attention. The other 2 German shepherds, now fully recovered and following Smokey's lead, waited for the signal. "We going in quiet," William whispered, his voice a low rumble. He didn't need to tell the dogs to stay low. They were already moving Vekepite, a synchronized stealth that confirmed their elite training. They began their descent into the valley, moving through the shadows of the towering pine. William used the terrain to his advantage, his rugged, sun-kissed skin blending into the earthy tones of the winter forest. They were ghosts in the snow, invisible to the untrained eye, closing the gap between the cabin and the mysterious warehouse. The air near the industrial site smelled of diesel and cold metal. William crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, Smokey pressed against his thigh. He could see the mercenaries now, 4 men in dark tactical gear, moving crates from a heavy-duty truck into the main hangar. There were no shouts, only the heavy thud of equipment. William pulled a small thermal monocular from his vest. The crates weren't filled with food or supplies. Through the lens, he saw the distinct heat signatures of high-tech electronic components and heavy machinery. This wasn't a local smuggling ring. This was an international operation. He looked at Smokey and gave a silent hand signal, 2 fingers pointed toward the loading dock. Without a sound, the Barmaki Logam dog slipped into the shadows, her black and tan fur making her nearly invisible in the dim light of the overcast day. She moved with a predatory grace, sniffing the perimeter and checking for sentries. She returned moments later, a low rhythmic vibration in her chest. She had found a way in. William's square jaw tightened. He knew the risks. If they were caught, there would be no backup. But as he looked at the intelligent dark brown eyes of the dog he had pulled from the ice, he knew he was alone. The side entrance to the warehouse was a heavy steel door, slightly ajar to allow for a thick power cable. William squeezed through, his muscular build barely fitting the gap, with the 3 dogs following in a single file. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of stacked pallets and humming generators. The light was flickering, casting long dancing shadows against the corrugated metal walls. William moved to a high vantage point on a mezzanine, his moss-green eyes scanning the floor below. Beneath them, the mercenaries were opening a large reinforced crate. Inside sat several sleek unmanned aerial vehicles. Drones, but not the kind you buy in a hobby shop. These were fitted Hat advanced surveillance arrays and jamming equipment. William realized the town's communication blackout during the storm had been an accident. It had been a test. These men were preparing to isolate the entire region. Smokey let out a soft huff, her pointed ears swiveling toward the far end of the hangar. Someone was coming. William pulled the dogs back into the darkness, his heart steady, his mind already calculating 3 different escape routes. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the concrete floor. A man with a scar running across his forehead walked directly beneath William's hiding spot. He stopped, sniffing the air, then looked up toward the mezzanine. William froze, his deep forehead wrinkles tensed as he held his breath. He placed a hand on Smokey's back, feeling the dog's muscles coiled like a spring. Smokey didn't growl, she didn't even breathe loudly. She remained as still as a statue, her dark brown eyes fixed on the threat below. The mercenary stayed there for Hat felt like an eternity, his hand resting on a radio at his belt. Just as he was about to climb the stairs, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the warehouse. One of the other German shepherds had tipped over a stack of empty plastic bins as a distraction. The man turned and ran toward the noise, shouting for his teammates. William didn't waste a second. He signaled the dogs to move, navigating the maze of crates toward the back of the building. They had seen enough. They had the evidence they needed, but getting out was going to be much harder than getting in. They reached the perimeter fence just as the sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, painting the snow in shades of bruised purple and orange. William leaned against a tree, his breath hitching in the cold air. His salt and pepper hair was damp with sweat, but his moss-green eyes were bright with a new purpose. He looked at Smokey, who was watching the warehouse with a fierce, protective gaze. He realized that these dogs hadn't been frozen by accident. They had likely been left for dead after trying to stop these men. "They want to get away with it," William whispered, patting Smokey's powerful chest. "Not while we're still standing." He knew the town's sheriff was miles away and likely cut off from all communications. It was up to an old seal and 3 discarded warriors to protect the valley. The mission had changed from a rescue to a standoff, and the real battle was only just beginning. If you want to see how William and Smokey take down this mercenary group using their elite skills, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. We have many more parts of this incredible journey coming your way. The peace of the mountain was shattered not by a sound but by a light. A single high-intensity flashlight beam cut through the swirling snow just a few hundred yards from William's cabin. They were here. William Wynne stood in the shadows of his porch, his Namuyi Aurora Lur Day frame as still as the trees. His deep moss-green eyes narrowed, the crow's feet deepening as he watched the tactical formation of the men approaching. They moved with the confidence of predators, but they didn't know the terrain. And they certainly didn't know that William had 3 elite guardians watching their every move from the tree line. "Smokey flank left," William whispered. The black and tan dog didn't hesitate. She melted into the darkness, her perfectly upright posture and powerful Barmy-Kilo gam frame moving with a silence that defied the crunchy snow. William didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he pulled a small handheld electronic jammer from his old kit. He knew these men relied on their high-tech comms. If he could strip away their ears, they would be nothing more than lost hikers in a frozen hell. The hook was set. The mercenaries thought they were the hunters, but they were about to walk into a masterclass in mountain warfare. The mercenaries reached the clearing, their breath visible in the freezing air. They held sophisticated tracking devices, pointing them toward the cabin. Just as the leader signaled for his team to split up, the air hummed with a strange, low-frequency vibration. William pressed the trigger on his jammer. Instantly, the mercenaries' headsets erupted in static. They stumbled, clutching their ears, the sudden loss of communication throwing them into a silent panic. In the confusion, a dark shape blurred past the lead man, Smokey. She didn't bite or growl, she simply snatched the tracking device right out of the man's hand with her long, strong muzzle and vanished back into the pines before he could even shout. William watched from a high rocky outcrop, his salt and pepper boxed beard dusted with snow. He felt a grim satisfaction. He was using their own reliance on technology against them. Without their devices, the mercenaries were blind. William signaled to the other 2 German shepherds, using a low-frequency whistle. It was time to lead these intruders on a long, exhausting walk through the most dangerous paths the Bitterroot Range had to offer. William led the way, his broad shoulders breaking a path through the deep snow. He was running, he was navigating. He knew where the thin ice was hidden over the creek and where the snowdrifts were 10 feet deep. Behind him, the mercenaries were struggling. Their heavy gear, which gave them an advantage in a city, was a death sentence in the mountains. Every time they tried to turn back, Smokey or one of the other dogs would appear on a ridge, their silhouettes tall and imposing, forcing the men to keep moving deeper into the wilderness. "Keep them moving, Smokey," William muttered to himself. He stopped to catch his breath, his powerful jawline tight with exertion. He looked down at his hands, rugged and sun-kissed despite the cold, and remembered why he had retired to these mountains. He wanted to leave the conflict behind. But as he saw the intelligent dark brown eyes of Smokey looking back at him for the next command, he realized that some men are born to stand in the gap. He wasn't fighting for a government anymore. He was fighting for the 3 lives he had pulled from the ice and the town that didn't yet know it was in danger. By midnight, the mercenaries were exhausted, huddled together near a frozen waterfall, miles from their base. William decided it was time for a face-to-face. He stepped out from behind a cedar tree, the moonlight catching his moss-green eyes. The mercenaries froze, their hands hovering near their belts, but they didn't draw. They were looking at the man, but they were more afraid of the 3 shadows that had surrounded them. Smokey stood at William's side, her upright posture radiating a quiet, deadly authority. "You re a long way from the warehouse," William said, his voice like grinding stones. The leader of the mercenaries, a man with a square jaw that mirrored William's own but lacked the same character, looked at the dogs. "Those animals belong to our client," the man spat. "They are expensive assets." William glanced down at Smokey, who let out a soft knowing huff. "These aren't tea assets," William replied. "They re-soldiers, and unlike you, they actually have a sense of loyalty." He showed them the microtransmitter he had removed earlier. The mercenaries' eyes widened. They realized then that they weren't dealing with a local hermit. They were dealing with someone who Kanoeve kept exactly what they were hiding. While William kept the mercenaries occupied in the high country, he had sent the other 2 German shepherds back toward the town. In their collars, he had tucked a written message and a flash drive containing the footage he had captured of the drones and the illegal weapons cache. As the sun began to rise, the 2 dogs arrived at the local sheriff's station. The town was just waking up to a world of sparkling frost, unaware of the drama unfolding in the peaks above. When Sheriff Miller opened the door, he didn't see a stray. He saw 2 highly disciplined dogs sitting perfectly still, waiting for him. The townspeople gathered around, shocked to see the frozen dogs they had heard rumors about. When the sheriff read the note and saw the seal insignia William had sketched at the bottom, the atmosphere changed from curiosity to alarm. The town finally understood that the 3 frozen dogs weren't just a miracle of survival. They were the messengers of a coming storm. Back on the mountain, William looked at Smokey and nodded. The first phase was over. Now, they just had to survive the journey back down. The journey back down the mountain was a test of endurance that would have broken a younger man. But William Wynne, with his broad shoulders and muscular build, moved with the steady rhythm of a machine. His moss-green eyes were sharp, cutting through the morning mist that clung to the pine needles. Beside him, Smokey paced him perfectly, her Bamekilogam frame a blur of black and tan against the white snow. She didn't tire, her upright posture never wavering even as they navigated the treacherous, icy slopes. William looked atop her and saw more than a dog. He saw a partner who understood the As they reached the outskirts of the warehouse district, William signaled for Smokey to halt. He knelt, his rugged, sun-kissed skin tight over his powerful jawline as he scanned the perimeter. The mercenaries had returned to their base, but the atmosphere had changed. They were frantic, moving with a chaotic energy that suggested they Kanoeve kept their time was running out. William's deep forehead wrinkles deepened as he realized they were preparing to launch the drone. If those machines took flight, the data they collected could compromise the security of the entire state. He had to disable the uplink, and he had to do it without firing a single shot. William didn't rely on brute force, he relied on the shadows. He led Smokey toward the rear of the warehouse where the main power transformers were housed behind a chain-link fence. His military buzz cut, now silver-flecked and damp with melted frost, glinted in the dim light. He reached into his tactical vest, pulling out a set of insulated wire cutters. His hands, though calloused and marked by years of service, moved with the delicacy of a watchmaker. He was looking to destroy the equipment. He was looking to create a feedback loop that would fry the Drone-S control software. Smokey stood guard at the corner of the fence, her pointed ears swiveling to catch the slightest sound of approaching boots. Her dark brown eyes were focused, reflecting an intelligence that felt almost human. When William finished the bypass, he tapped the metal fence twice. Smokey immediately moved to his side, her long, strong muzzle nudging his hand as if to confirm the task was done. Suddenly, a series of muffled pops echoed from inside the warehouse as the control consoles began to short-circuit. The mercenaries' shouts of confusion rose from within, but William was already moving, leading Smokey back into the safety of the tree line. Down in the valley, the town of Silver Creek was no longer sleeping. Sheriff Miller had mobilized a group of local volunteers, inspired by the arrival of the 2 German shepherds and the evidence William had sent. They weren't an army, but they were a community, and they were armed with the truth. The legend of the frozen dogs had spread through the local diner and the general store like wildfire. People spoke in hushed tones about the veteran on the mountain who had pulled 3 souls from the ice and uncovered a conspiracy in their own backyard. The sheriff looked at Moff, the flash drive William had provided, his face pale as he saw the scale of the mercenary operation. He realized that the logging company that had moved in 6 months ago was a front for something much darker. He looked at the 2 German shepherds sitting patiently in his office, their tan and black coats now clean and gleaming. They looked ready for a fight, but they were waiting for a leader. Miller grabbed his keys and looked at his deputies. "We re-going up there," he said firmly. "We re-bringing our neighbor and his dogs home." Back at the warehouse, the mercenaries were desperate. The drones were grounded, their electronics hissing with static. The leader, his face flushed with rage, ordered his men to scout the woods. They knew William was out there, and they knew he was the source of their problem. William watched them from a concealed position beneath a fallen cedar. He looked at Smokey and whispered a single word, "Ghost." It was a command they had practiced in the quiet hours of the night at his cabin. Smokey didn't attack. Instead, she began to move in a wide circle around the mercenaries, occasionally snapping a dry twig or letting out a low, echoing huff that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The men, already on edge, began to turn in circles, their flashlights dancing wildly through the trees. They were chasing a shadow they couldn't catch. William used the distraction to slip toward the heavy-duty truck parked near the hangar. With a quick, silent movement, he disabled the ignition systems of their escape vehicles. He was boxing them in, slowly and methodically, stripping away their options until only one path remained. The sun was high in the sky now, reflecting off the square jaw and moss-green eyes of William Wynne as he stepped out into the clearing, fully visible for the first time. He stood with his broad shoulders squared, a figure of undeniable authority. Smokey was at his right side, her posture perfectly upright, her dark brown eyes fixed on the mercenary leader. The other 2 German shepherds, having led the sheriff's convoy up the back trail, suddenly appeared from the opposite side of the clearing. The mercenaries were surrounded not by soldiers but by a veteran and the 3 lives he had saved. "It's over," William said, his voice a calm, low rumble that carried across the frozen ground. The mercenary leader looked at his disabled trucks, his fried electronics, and the 3 powerful dogs blocking every exit. He saw the rugged, determined face of a man who had faced far worse than a few hired guns in the snow. Just then the sound of sirens began to echo through the valley as the sheriff's vehicles rounded the final bend. The mercenaries dropped their gear, realizing that the old man they thought was an easy target had systematically dismantled their entire operation. Verkepte had nothing but his mind and his loyal companions. The clearing was silent, save for the low hum of the wind through the pines. William Wynne stood his ground, his broad shoulders squared against the mountain chill. His moss-green eyes, framed by those deep crow's feet, didn't blink as the mercenary leader stepped forward. The man looked at William S., salt and pepper, boxed beard, and his rugged, weathered skin, realizing he wasn't facing a simple mountain dweller. He was facing a man who had mastered the art of the silent victory. Smokey remained a statue of black and tan fur at William's side, her dark brown eyes locked on the leader every movement. "You've caused a lot of trouble for a man just looking for a quiet retirement," the mercenary said, his voice straining to remain calm. William didn't reply immediately. He let the silence do the work. He adjusted his stance, his muscular build radiating a quiet power that made the younger men hesitate. "The trouble wasn't mine to start," William finally said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "It started when you left these three to die in the ice. On my mountain we look after our own." Smokey let out a sharp, singular bark, a Soldier S punctuation to a Commander S statement. The mercenaries looked at each other, their hands twitching, but with the Sheriff S sirens screaming closer, they knew the mountain had already claimed its winner. Sheriff Miller S cruiser slid to a halt at the edge of the clearing, followed by two more local vehicles. The flashing red and blue lights danced across the square jaw and powerful jawline of William Wynne. As the deputy stepped out, they didn't see a battlefield. They saw a controlled environment. William had systematically dismantled the threat without shedding a drop of blood. He stepped toward the sheriff, his gait steady and disciplined. "They re all yours, Miller," William said, gesturing to the group of dejected men. "The trucks are disabled, and the uplink is The sheriff looked from the mercenaries to the three German shepherds. "William, the town is talking about nothing but these dogs. They say you pulled them out of a glacier." William looked down at Smokey, whose upright posture and intelligent gaze seemed to command respect even from the law. "They pulled themselves out, Sheriff. Mott Diuette gave them a warm place to realize they weren't finished yet." William's hands, sun-kissed and rugged, rested on Smokey's head. He knew the legal battle was just beginning, but for now the immediate threat to his home had been neutralized. However, Smokey's ears suddenly flicked toward the warehouse. She knew something they didn't. While the deputies began the process of detaining the mercenaries, William and Smokey moved toward the main hangar. The other two German shepherds followed closely, their tactical instincts still on high alert. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ozone from the short-circuited electronics. William's deep forehead wrinkles creased as he surveyed the rows of crates. It was just drones. As Smokey led him toward a reinforced room at the back, he found something far more concerning, a sophisticated mapping system of the Region S underground water tables and mineral deposits. These men weren't just weapon smugglers, they were scouting for a private corporation looking to illegally seize local resources under the cover of the storm. William's moss-green eyes darkened. This was a different kind of war, fought via Capitaine surveyors and legal loopholes backed by hired muscle. Smokey nudged a specific crate with her long, strong muzzle. William pried it open to find high-frequency geological sensors. "They were going to drain the valley dry," he whispered. The dogs stood in a protective circle around him, their presence a reminder that the land had its own defenders. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows over the snow, William sat on the bumper of his old truck. He looked at his hands, the hands of a developer, a creator, and a warrior. He felt every one of his Nammi years, the salt and pepper hair on his head a testament to the seasons he had weathered. Smokey sat at his feet, her Bamiki Logam a grounding presence. The bond between them had moved past rescue and gratitude. They were now two souls who spoke the same language of duty and resilience. "You did good, Smokey," he murmured, his voice softening. The dog looked up, her dark brown eyes reflecting the orange glow of the horizon. She leaned her head against his knee, a rare display of affection from a dog trained for the harshest conditions. William realized that his life in the mountains wouldn't be as lonely as he had planned. He had found a family in the ice, but as he looked at the warehouse one last time, he noticed a faint, blinking red light on a secondary tower he hadn't seen before. The fail-safe had been activated. William stood up, his muscular frame tensing once more. The secondary tower was broadcasting a signal, an encrypted burst of data heading straight for a satellite. Even with the main uplink fried, they had a backup. Smokey sensed his change in mood and stood instantly, her pointed ears swiveling. "They resending the data out, Smokey. Everything they mapped. If that data reached the corporate headquarters, the legal fight for the valley would be lost before it even started." He didn't have much time. The tower was located on a jagged ridge above the warehouse, accessible only by a narrow, icy goat path. William looked at his boots, then at the dogs. "One last climb," he said, his square jaw set in a grim line of determination. The three German shepherds didn't hesitate. They turned toward the ridge, their black and tan fur blending into the deepening shadows. William Wynne moved Vekepite at them, a Nammi-year-old force of nature, ready to ensure that the secrets of his mountains stayed buried under the snow where they belonged. The goat path was a razor-esque edge of black rock and treacherous ice. William Wynne hauled his number-year-old upward, his broad shoulders burning with the effort. Every breath felt like inhaling glass, but his moss-green eyes remained fixed on the red blinking light of the secondary relay tower above. He moved with a rhythmic mechanical efficiency, his sun-kissed skin tightening over his square jaw as he fought the vertical terrain. Beside him, Smokey was a marvel of biological engineering. Her balmy kilogram frame shifted weight effortlessly, her black and tan fur bristling against the gale. The other two German shepherds followed, their upright posture making them look like shadows of ancient wolves navigating the peaks. William looked down once. The valley was a sea of darkness punctuated by the flashing lights of the sheriff's cruisers. They were too far away. This was a sealess mission, solo, silent, and high stakes. He reached a ledge and paused, the salt and pepper hair of his buzz cut damp with sweat despite the sub-zero temperatures. He checked the time. The data burst was Salmi Fantam complete. He had less than 10 minutes to silence the Mountainess' last secret. They reached the summit where the steel tower groaned under the weight of frozen rain. It was a skeleton of metal reaching into the black sky. William moved to the control box at the base, his fingers, though calloused and rugged, moving with a precision that hadn't faded with age. He saw the encrypted uplink active. The fail-safe was dumping years of illegal mapping data into a private cloud. Smokey stood behind him, her pointed ears swiveling to the sound of the wind, her dark brown eyes scanning the ridge for any straggling mercenaries. William's deep forehead wrinkles creased as he assessed the wiring. It was a booby-trapped system, designed to fry the hardware if tampered with. He didn't have the tools for a clean extraction, but he didn't need the data. He just needed it gone. He looked at the long, strong muzzle of Smokey and then back at the wires. He pulled a heavy-duty climbing carabiner from his belt. By grounding the main antenna to the lightning rod during a static heavy storm, he could create a natural surge. It was a move born of desperation and genius, the kind of field-expedient solution that had saved his life in a dozen different countries. Just as William began to bridge the connection, a shadow emerged from behind the Tower S base. It was the mercenary leader S second in command, a man who had escaped the sheriff initial sweep. He didn't have a weapon, but he was younger, faster, and desperate. He lunged for William, but he never made it. Smokey was a blur of tan and black. She didn't bite or growl. She used her sheer bami kilogram mass to intercept him, her upright posture providing the leverage to knock the man off balance and into a soft but deep snowdrift. The man scrambled to get up, but the other two German shepherds stood over him, their dark brown eyes reflecting the cold moonlight. They didn't move, they didn't bark. They simply existed as a wall of canine muscle. William didn't even look back. He locked the carabiner into place. A brilliant arc of blue static hissed through the metal, and the red blinking light on the tower turned a dull, lifeless grey. The transmission was severed. The secret maps of the valley's resources were now nothing more than digital dust scattered in the wind. The walk back down was different. The tension that had held William's broad shoulders tight for days finally began to dissolve. The sun began to peek over the eastern ridges, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. William Wynne, a man who had spent his life in the shadows of conflict, felt a strange new warmth. He looked at his salt and pepper boxed beard in the reflection of his compass and saw a man who had finally found his purpose in the peace of the peaks. By the time they reached the valley floor, the town of Silver Creek was waiting. Sheriff Miller was there, but so were the townspeople, the shopkeepers, the teachers, and the family. They stood in a silent line as the tall, square-jawed veteran walked out of the tree line, followed by three perfectly disciplined German shepherds. There was no cheering, only a profound sense of gratitude. The frozen dogs weren't just a miracle of survival anymore. They were the heroes who had saved the town's future. William S. moss-green eyes crinkled at the corners, the crow's feet deepening as he offered a simple, tired nod to his neighbour. 6 months later, the Bitterroot Range was lush with the green of late spring. The warehouse had been dismantled, and the land was officially designated as a protected forest reserve. At the cabin on the ridge, the door swung open. William Wynne stepped out, wearing a simple work shirt that highlighted his muscular build. His sun-kissed skin looked healthier, and the silver streaks in his beard seemed to catch the morning light. He was to hermit anymore. He was the Region S lead conservation warden. Beside him, Smokey sat in her signature upright posture, her black and tan fur gleaming. The other two dogs played in the tall grass nearby. They were no longer the frozen dogs, they were William S. family. He knelt down, his powerful hands scratching Smokey behind her pointed ears. The intelligent, dark brown eyes of the dog met the moss-green eyes of the man, and for a moment the world was perfectly still. They had Beote Hat been discarded by the world, left to freeze in the shadows, but together they had built a fire that would never go out. The veteran and his K-Chiness had found their redemption in the very mountains that had tried to claim.
The Channel The Dog and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.